Good morning from New York. I welcome everybody to this session of the IFPH Explorers. Today we have like a very creative and innovative session. We have with us Dr. Miriam Dalal. This event today is going to take more an interview approach. So I will introduce Miriam and then she will start talking to you. So Dr. Miriam Dalal is a research associate currently affiliated with Goldsmiths, University of London. Her work draws on participatory practices, public history, and artistic research to document absence and silence in contexts of political violence. At the newly established Migrant Futures Institute, she leads the project The Virtual House of the Rejected, which proposes the co creation of an effective archive with survivors, witnesses, and family members of people who went missing in the Mediterranean Sea over the past decade. Following her PhD in Arts and Science of Art from the Sorbonne University in France, Dr. Dalal concluded a postdoctoral fellowship in public history, co-production, and participatory practices at the University of Luxembourg, where she worked with Portuguese, Cape Verdean, Syrian, and Palestinian communities to revisit Luxembourg's history of migration. She also served as a public history and outreach consultant for the Public History Axis of the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, where she managed multiple projects across the global south, namely in Egypt, Kenya, Martinique, Qatar, and Lebanon. Miriam, thank you very much for accepting the Explorer's invitation and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jimena. I'm really excited about this conversation, and I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you specifically. I'm happy and I'm glad that we had and made the time for it.
Yes, so just to start, Miriam, well, I already introduced you a little bit, but it was very academic or brief, let's say. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What's your formation? Like more about your history and how did you arrive to public history?
Okay. So I'm originally Lebanese, from the south of Lebanon. I was born into a history of migration of my own because we were living in Kuwait during the Lebanese Civil War, and then we moved back to Lebanon. We had to move a couple of times every time Israel decided to bomb the region where we were living or our villages. And then I moved outside of Lebanon after the 2020 Beirut port explosion. Made it for some time to France to do a PhD, a postdoc in Luxembourg, and now I'm in London, as you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction. My practice was at the beginning more focused on arts, because from from a very personal perspective, I've always seen art as a medium for me to communicate to everybody else, including and starting with my family. When I was really little, I felt like the words always get stuck in my throat when I want to say something, and it was always easier to draw it somewhere or to do something and then present it, and then have the object itself speak about either how I'm feeling or what I want to say. So really, I moved into studying arts because I wanted to continue doing this with the public. I wanted to speak to everybody about a lot of things. And having lived all of these different experiences that I've mentioned very briefly at the beginning, from migration to violence, to war, to displacement, I wanted to speak about these with the communities who have lived it or the people who have experienced something similar and who could connect to the message. But then I also found out during my studies of fine arts at the university in Lebanon and then later in France that contemporary art practices and the art world itself have become really more of a elitist thing where the message doesn't come across because it sits either in museums or in galleries. It's very difficult for people to connect with it because the language is very difficult. The curation of the work itself makes it impossible for anyone to understand it because it's too complicated for them. And I thought, this is not what I wanted arts to be. This is not why I went into arts. and this is where I found out about public history. It was also something that I discovered while doing a PhD in arts. I was like, the doors were closed and getting closed in different perspectives as I was working on my subject. And I'm like, okay, arts will not help me address this. Let's see what else can do it. And it was practically through the readings of how is it that we can do more engaged work with the communities? How is it that we could bring back history to the people whose history has been erased? How is it that we can actively involve people in documenting this history? And voila, public history was an answer to all of this. So it made sense for me to move more towards the practice of public history because it answered a lot of questions that arts couldn't answer anymore or wasn't made to answer anymore in its current format. But like just an anecdote, because it's really funny. I had this question when we were doing a workshop in Nairobi a couple of months ago, and then the moderator Chow was like, Miriam, when did you first hear the word public history? And I was like, when I saw the job post for the postdoc in Luxembourg. This is literally the first time where I looked and I was like, okay, the job application says you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I do all of this. But then they're recruiting a public historian. Does it mean I'm a public historian? And this is literally where it went. It clicked in my head. I was like, yes. I mean, if you do all of this, then might as well just call the practice itself that you do public history practice. So yeah, maybe that's enough for now.
Thank you, Miriam. I think that what happened to you with public history has happened to many of us, that we start working and then after the fact we realize we are public historians or at least try to be. So thank you very much. But the second question was the one I'm really looking forward to, because as you know, I'm from the global south too, from another region, from Latin America. And when we talk about guerrilla in Latin America, it has a very charged meaning. So, how do you define guerrilla public history, and why did you feel the need to develop this concept beyond more traditional models of public history?
Yes. So guerrilla means, as you said, it's a very charged word in Latin America, and it's equally as charged in the Middle East and in the Arab world. And I wanted to keep the word guerrilla in the way that we pronounce it in Latin America, because this is what I'm also referring to. In the Arab world, this is a way of combat that we use for resistance movements, and it is practically what I want to bring from this world into academia and into our own research. And I explain a bit, and then we dive into it a bit more after. Guerrilla public history is a way of practicing public history outside of the institution, as guerrilla movements have been. It's a way of doing history in the street. And when I talk about the street, I talk about it as a metaphor, but also practically in the street. You have to be where people are, and you have to engage with people, bring awareness to history in the street and not in closed spaces or elitist spaces. It's also a practice that used or wants to use all the combat method that guerrilla does, from using very little resources to function. So we don't have a lot of funding, but we can still do so little. So let's do this very little. It's scaling down all the work that we do in public history, because when we're scaling up, we need more funding. And this is where funding becomes something that's politically motivated, and it changes everything that we want to do, and it controls our narratives. So we use little funding. We try and do very little projects, but to have more impact and build on it for the long run. It's also a method that wants to not shy away from the fight. When I say the fight, I mean when we come to a point where we're talking about a history that's been stripped through violence, and not just any other public history project. When we're talking about histories that have been silenced, that have been taken away from us or from the people who it belongs to, this is where we need to use our position to fight back. And it's a call to to not be afraid of going for this confrontation. Back in the days, I could say in the 60s and 70s, there was a word in Arabic for the intellectual who's not afraid of doing this confrontation, and we call it the mushtabik. Mushtabik is, if I want to explain it in English, it's the entanglement, but also the fight. And mushtabik is practically this person, a person who's not afraid of getting into a fight when claiming their rights or when speaking about their rights, but it's also someone who can engage in something. So they can be entangled, but they could also fight when the things become hard. And lastly, guerrilla uses the method of hiding or concealing when things become difficult and when things are threatening for their existence. And this is also a practice that we cannot do when we're academics doing regular public history, because we're always exposed, we're always everywhere, everybody needs to see our work. Our funders are always requesting like these very detailed reports where we have to walk them through every engagement that we did. But then if you're practicing guerrilla public history, and when things become hard, you have the right to disappear and go off track and off the map. And this is what I'm trying to call for, because when you're doing work that is resistant but also confrontational, it means that the institution is going to fight back. And when the institution is going to fight back, you need to find ways for you to not put yourself in a position where you're at risk. So you have to hide. And this is a method that I'm not making anything up. All of this was used in Lebanon and Palestine for years and years, and it proved to be very successful. We just need to bring it back to academia because this is what we need.
Miriam, thank you. Your words have resonate a lot with me in the current context I'm living. You know, I live in the United States, and we need a lot of confrontation, but there's also have been like a lot of I mean the government has persecuted some colleagues, and they I think they also have the right to hide. So I think this is actually a very timely and important concept. You already answered a little bit of what goes to my third question, but I would like you to go a little bit more in detail. How does guerrilla public history challenge institutional spaces like museums and universities and state-sponsored projects?
Yes, so this is where we can flesh out the method in a more practical way. As you said, it's a timely method, but it's also not just because we're in a position where, and I'm speaking from a position of someone who's Lebanese, who's an Arab, and who's a pro-Palestinian. We are actively seeing our history being erased and our regions being erased and our cultural heritage being erased. And this is why this is timely. But on the other hand, it's also timely because the subject is being used by academia and commodified to a point where it no longer has an impact. And when I say the subject, I mean when we're talking about decolonizing this, decolonizing that, we are seeing the word everywhere and everybody's using it in their funding applications. And it's like the buzzword. Oh, I'm doing decolonization. And I feel like we need to claim it back in a practical way because none of it is getting us to the point where we're reclaiming the land, asking for reparations, getting repatriation. All of this is the actual decolonization. It's not the words. It's not you doing a research project and coming up with a document that says we decolonized. If you're not bringing back the right and the history to the people whose history has been erased, you're not doing it. So to say more practically what we want to do and why it challenges the institution, when I talk about museums and universities and public funding, I'm talking about institutions that are modeled financially by relying on resources that get to them to do the actual work. And the money that comes to them is coming for a reason. So there's always a political motivation into any money that's being spent on anything. And we cannot be like just blindsided and say, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just money because people want to be nice. Any money that's put into research, into exhibitions, into public engagement, into outreach is money that has an objective from the funder's perspective, but it also has objectives from our perspective. What the researchers and the artists have been trying to do in the past years is to try and use this money to actually address very timely topics, from the environmental challenges to colonization and its impact to occupation to everything else, to, I don't know, capitalism, colonialism, you name it, everything that's been wrong in the world. And I think a lot, it started out as from a from a from a very good point for the artist and the academic that wanted to actually do the work, but then it got used by the institution to just say very little. And this is where I felt like, and I've seen it myself, having been in the arts and culture sector, working for over 15 years, but also working within academic circles for the past 6 years, there's so much that you can do within the institution. And you get to a point where you're going to be confrontational, and someone is going to ask you to stop doing what you're doing, or to change the wording, or to not publish this, or to retract what you said, or to make sure that what you're saying is not going to upset the funder, or to stop doing the work with the community because this community is considered the terrorist community. And this is where you're going to be like, what is it that, how much can I do within these circles? And am I actually doing a favor and working for the history of the community, or am I just doing like checking the marks and going with very little impact? So when you do guerrilla work, when you do guerrilla public history, you have ways to use your position within the institution and your privileges from being based in a global north institution where you have funding, but you can take some of this money, some of these resources, some of this knowledge outside of your institution, invest it in grassroots initiatives and with people who are actively doing the fight for them to carry out the work. And I call it the fungi model, and it's actually based on an illustration that Thomas Covin, Professor Thomas Covin, who's a public historian, who's here with us today, he had an illustration to represent what public history means, and it's a tree. It's a beautiful tree that has roots, it has the trunk, and it has the branches and the leaves as every other tree. What I wanted to do is to represent this tree as an institutional model of doing public history that has its limitation. It's been there, it's been carried out for years. Someone is taking care of it, money is being put into it so that it remains a beautiful tree with fruits and flowers and leaves. But then this tree needs to be infiltrated by us, the people who are doing public history work outside of the institution. We need to take some of the resources from this tree, communicate with other trees so that the ecosystem can survive. And within these trees, this is where the fungi grows. And it grows in different models, in different colors, in different shapes. It's smaller than the tree, and I know this, but it's also something that sustains itself, and it can carry out a lot of the work that we cannot do. We need to realize that us being in these positions means that we can help. We just need to be humble in the way that we frame our work. You're not doing decolonization, but you might have the resources to help other practitioners who are doing the work that's more radical, that's outside the institution, to actually do the decolonization.
Thank you, Miriam. I think what you're saying is so important. And it also makes me think about, again, I can only think about the context I know in Latin America. When we talk about decolonization, we're talking about this up since the 60s. So for us, it's nothing new. For other researchers in other parts of the world, they take this buzzword and think that by just saying the word or funding certain things, they're actually doing it while they're not. I really love it. I really love it. And that brings me to my next question. Your works emphasizes histories that have been erased, fragmented, or suppressed. Why is reclaiming this history such an urgent political act today?
Yeah. Why? Do I need to elaborate on this? Why? I'm talking to you, Jimena, today, And as I said at the beginning, I'm from the south of Lebanon. I'm talking to you today while actively I cannot return back to my village. And none of the people I know from the south of Lebanon can come back to their villages. More than 150 villages have been put on the map of the yellow line, which means they have been kicked from their land with no unforeseen date for their return. And this is not something that is isolated from anything that is happening in Palestine or in Gaza. It's very similar. When I talk about this, I talk about not just the people leaving their villages. It means the places no longer exist. The archives are burnt or looted or destroyed. The cultural heritage that's been there for centuries is bombed, and everything else is no longer on the map or visible. When something like this happens, you're put in a position where you feel like you have an obligation to do something. The it's an obligation that you cannot ignore. It's like a voice that doesn't allow you to sleep at night, and it's there the whole time, and it's something that you do while you're witnessing all of this, and it's very, very difficult. And I can only imagine what it means for my Palestinian colleagues who are still doing all this work, because it's a lot of responsibility on your shoulder, but it's also a lot of emotional baggage that you're trying to shuffle and go like, no, I'll deal with this later, because there's an urgency. It's also something that you mentioned, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's not only applicable in my context in Lebanon and in Palestine, it's also applicable elsewhere. There's a growing movement, and we're all aware of this. There's a growing movement to erase a lot of histories across the globe because it's upsetting to certain political parties that are in power. It's in the US, it's in the UK, it's everywhere else. We're seeing it, we're actively witnessing it. In situations like this, you go back and reflect on why is it that you're here? How much can you do, and how much can you actively call for other people to do? And solidarity is something that we underestimate so much, but it's also why you and I are doing this conversation today, because it's the more we can get people to learn about the work that we're doing and bring them to the subject and to this circle, the more we can have an impact. We might not be able to change anything today. We might have to conceal, as Guerrilla does, but we'll still have the tools to document and preserve, to come back and show it back when the time is right. I feel like there's a context where we might come to a point where we feel like we're hopeless, because we're working on a very small scale with very minimal resources, while the empire showed us its face in all its powers, all its money, all its tools, all its military facilities, all its AI that's practically killing us and investing in killing us and monitoring us just to make sure that we die when they want to. And I want to acknowledge this too. I want to acknowledge that I'm not talking today about something like a magic pill that can fix everything. We might still not win this fight, but I'm saying we will not go without the fight.
Thank you, Miriam. I think that's truly, truly important. I see it, for example, the hopelessness that you're talking about. I see it, for example, in my students. And they ask me, what can we do? And I mean, I don't have any answers. But just having this conversation, just putting things out there, just showing evidence, just being aware of the news, just being aware of what's happening, I think it's a really important thing to do. And I agree with you. Perhaps we cannot change, but oh my God, they're gonna hear our voice. They're gonna hear it until we can. So, how did the context of the Lebanese civil war shape your understanding of memory, archives, and public engagement?
Yes, thank you. So this is where I started my research, my PhD. At the beginning, I wanted to try and see why is it that we have very little images remaining from the Lebanese Civil War period. For context, the Lebanese Civil War was a war that extended from 1975 until 1990 officially. So 15 years of war. All the photojournalists were taking pictures. We know that there are millions and millions of pictures. And in Lebanon, we have access to very little of those. And the ones that are iconic or that we see more often are just two pictures. So I went in with the mindset where I'm like, let's look for this, like for these images. Did they disappear? Did someone destroy them? Was it only a lack of archiving? Was it a lack of expertise from the Lebanese photojournalist side, etc.? So it started out as an investigation. And then bits by bits, I also found out that it was a lot of layers of disappearance from the political messaging that every news agency had and their agendas and what they wanted to show and what they didn't, to the aesthetics at that time that came from the Vietnam War to the Lebanese War on what is it that counts as a nice image of the war. So these images were selected either aesthetically or politically. So then there was a third layer where I found out that we don't have a Lebanese National Archive of the Civil War. So these pictures are scattered, and they're scattered in different institutions, but also different photographic agencies. And you have to pay money to have access to the archives. And they're kept in foreign countries or with private collectors. So there was also the question of like the decentralized archive, but also the access to archive and who has access to it. And then the last layer was like, okay, so if we still have the pictures that were taken by the photojournalists, kept in their own records, can we come together and make this a national archive? I mean, it didn't happen in the 90s. It didn't happen after the war. Can it happen after? And does it need to happen? And this is where I started seeing very clearly that even if you do a project where you bring in those archives, a million pictures from 10 Lebanese photojournalists who covered the 15-year old war, you still have a lot of questions to grapple with from which institution do you choose? Who has access to this institution? What kind of public programming do they have? Who's going to see those pictures? Is it going to be accessible for everybody in Lebanon, or is it just another cultural institution with access only to the elites and the upper classes? Who's going to fund the preservation of these archives? Who's going to fund the public programming, etc.? And my realization of all of this was when I started thinking with public history as an answer. I'm like, maybe we can do something with the communities. Maybe if we bring back those pictures to the streets and gave people access to it, they could help us with the documentation because we don't have a lot of information on a lot of the pictures, and we still have, up until today, 17,000 people declared disappear since the end of the war. And we might find the clues in these pictures. So maybe people can help us with a location, identifying a person, a last scene, etc. Can we work with people in the street to give them access to these pictures rather than put them in a museum where very little access is given and people are afraid of going into museums because museums look very fancy? And I think from this context of access to archives, accessibility to archive, public engagement with the archive, community work, community archiving in the context of the Lebanese Civil War in the context of the collective memory of the Lebanese society, this is this was a this was an eye-opening moment where I started working with these methods, and maybe, like, if I could use the word, experimenting with public history came into practice.
Thank you, Miriam. That was another question I had, but you already answered. Like what happens when archives return to the streets, communities, and everyday life? I don't know if you want to expand on that, because I think it's still important to realize. I'm also thinking about other events I had with explorers about community archives in India and how all the voices return to the community, and that's very inspiring. And that's really, really very inspiring.
Yeah, so you've explained it very beautifully. The voices come back to the community, and this is primarily why we need to think of archives outside of, I'm sorry, this is London, so you're going to hear a lot of ambulances and police cars. uh, um, we need to think of the archives as a place that we inhabit, we the people, because it hasn't been conceived as such. Archives were always like a one of the colonial tools to preserve its own history. It's like, how can we make sure that our narrative is maintained for a bazillion years? So we start an archive and then we do what the institution wants. And we were not in these archives. Although we've had our very own distinct ways of preserving our history. And all of these methods were not recognized as archiving. Like when we talk about intangible cultural heritage, when we talk about knitting, when we talk about singing, when we talk about oral histories and all of this, we've we've managed to get the message across five and six generations, and it was intact, and it didn't have to be on a manuscript that's written and preserved in some institution. So we had our ways of archiving, but then the community element, just it's just so important for people to feel like they have agency. And this is something that, because the a lot of communities in the global south have been conditioned to think that nobody cares about their voice, or nobody cares about their story, or nobody cares about what they kept in their families for generations on. It's it's important to bring back the agency element, and it's important to bring back this into the conversation where people feel like everything that they've been told was not important was actually important. And it was because it was important that they were asked to be silent. It's because it shakes the empire's image.
Thank you, Miriam. And this is actually very closely related to the next question I had for you. You draw on thinkers such as Paulo Freire and Frantz Fanon. How have their ideas influenced your methodology and approach to public history?
Yeah. When I started thinking with how is it that I can theorize what guerrilla public history is? Because at the beginning I was just thinking practically. It's like, oh, if I have money, and if the institution is going to stop me from saying what I want to say, maybe I can funnel some of the money outside, and then someone else can say it and do it. But then I still needed to put the thought into words. And it was so natural for me to link both Freire and Fanon, because for Freire, when we talk about action research, it is agency, it is purpose, it is voice. And this is what we want from public history. And when we talk about Fanon, it is violence. It is reclaiming history that was taken from you. And we need that too. And I know that what we're talking about here is a methodology that could be used elsewhere in the humanities. I just think that the particularity of public history is that it deals with history. And what we're living today is a question of erasure of history because we want to control the future. And this is why it's very important we start practicing it as public historians before we practice it in other fields of the humanities. Yeah.
Miriam, guerrilla public history seems deeply connected to questions of migration, colonialism, censorship, and political violence, as you have told us in this time. How do you see this particular guerrilla public history important or relevant to the global South, specifically for the global South, and why?
Yes. Maybe I'll start with a concrete example. So some of the people here might know this. A couple of weeks ago, maybe month, Ghana came to the UN with a suggestion and a bill to try and seek consensus and vote on admitting that slavery was the gravest crime against humanity, which also meant that this means the countries who committed all of this need to pay reparations and acknowledge it. The bill that was passed by Ghana was vetoed by the US, Israel, and then Argentina, but it was also not voted on by all of the European Union and the UK. So they abstained from voting. When you're confronted with this very clear message, as an academic who's working in the global north, and you've been told that you can do research on decolonization within your institution, while your actual country where you're hosted is not willing to admit that what they did was actually a crime against humanity, what is it that you can do? How much can you keep lying to yourself? Because it is just that. We were confronted with the very clear message. It was like a slap on the face. It's like, wake up. We're not going to do this. And when things like this happen, you're like, okay, but there must be another way to confront it. And this is something that comes at different levels. Ghana's lawmakers, a humanitarian organization, and everybody who was involved in putting this bill did a lot of work. And we need to have their backs. Maybe they knew that there's not going to be consensus on this, but they wanted this first step for us to continue working. And we need to build on these momentums. We need to build on these confrontations. When it's very, very clear that none of these countries issued a statement saying, why is it that they're abstained from voting? It is a clear message to us. I know the global south is not one entity and it's not monolithic. And I need to address this very clearly because in the global south, we have all political parties. And I'm gonna speak for myself. And in Lebanon, we have right-wing parties that could sit here and tell you that everything that I'm saying is nothing and useless, and I need to go kill myself. In Lebanon, we have every social class on planet Earth, and some people are not even the very bit thinking that they're part of the global south because of their proximity to whiteness, because of their social class. And they don't want to be addressed as such. They might be more comfortable being called friends of France. And this is what we, in Lebanon, because France was a colonizer of Lebanon, and we had this very weird relationship with France all over our history and since the 1920s, there is a considerate amount of people in Lebanon who think that because they're close to France, they're close to whiteness, and they're part of the global north. And I wish I was saying random shit. It's very true. So the global south is not one entity, Jimena, but it still speaks to a lot of people who have been subjected to violence in different levels and in different parts of the world. And when this violence becomes authoritarian in the way they take your history from you and they tell you that everything that you've lived and everything that you've known is wrong, this is where this method is going to be applicable. It's for the people who have been rendered invisible by the system.
Thank you, Miriam, so much. I couldn't said it better, and I feel very encouraged. I'm very motivated, as you might know. The comeback of the right in Latin America right now is atrocious. It's just very, very scary. And in my country, Colombia, we're going to have elections in 2 weeks, and it's almost sure that a very right wing, I mean, Trump is going to win, and that's scary, So, well, okay, that's another conversation. Can you talk about uh, your project Memomaton and how it transformed ordinary public spaces into sites of memory and dialogue?
Yes. So the Memomaton was actually a tool that I designed to make sure that the archives from the Lebanese Civil War come back to the street and are given back to the people. And it looks like a street vendor cart. And we have these in Lebanon to sell kaik, which is a type of dough that we sell in the streets, and to sell all types of food that you can get off when you're walking on the Corniche and in the busy streets. So it's a mobile archival tool, and it comes on a bicycle, and it has a screen, and it can stop in every street, and people could have access to all the images through the screen, and they could also contribute with their testimony either anonymously or with their names if they wish to, and record information on any of the pictures that they've seen if they want to add documentation specifics. So they could tell you about the location, a date that we don't have, a person that they've seen, where were they seen, and if they have any stories, they could also record it. This was a tool that I worked on during my PhD and that I tried during the last years of my thesis to get it funded and to to try and make this a reality, get it outside of the books and into the streets. And this is where I was confronted with every question that got me to do Guerrilla Public History. At the beginning, I tried to get funding in Lebanon through cultural institutions. And then I was told, and I found out that most of these cultural institutions get their funding either through international donors or through embassies' cultural programs. When you go to the embassies, it's going to be a political program that gets funneled through public channels. And then you're like, okay, are the people going to trust this if it says funded by X embassy? Are the photographers going to entrust me with these archives if it says that it came from this political party or from this political party or from this person who's of this sect who was known to be involved in the war during X year? And it ended up just staying as a beautiful ideal scenario of what a community archival tool could look like. And as Jimena just mentioned, you could have a I'll put the link in the chat. It's for the article that I published recently on the subject, And it has a picture of the emancipator and a description of what it is for people to see.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I read the article, and it's really good, so I recommend that reading highly. Um, Miriam, what advice would you give to students, artists, historians, and activists who want to practice more politically committed and community-centered forms of public history?
Mm, it's not an, I don't know how to frame it. It's not an advice. It's more of a call for action. And I want people to hear me. If they're willing to hear me, please hear me out. For those of us who are still working within the institutions, be realistic and honest with your research, your artwork, your whatever, your practice. And when I say this, I mean don't use buzzwords that are harming the communities that are going through so much and are trying to work with you. Be realistic on how much it is that you can do, what is it that you can't do, and be honest with this. For those of us who are willing to be mushtabik, so who are willing to be the intellectuals who are going to go and fight, still within the institution. I'm not asking anybody to go jobless and sit in the street. If you're still within the institution and you still want to help make things happen, there's no differentiation between the civilians and the combatants in the context of colonial wars and colonial legacies. I know the humanitarian language in the past years have convinced everybody that some people are civilians and some people aren't. Let's forget about this. You can do so much in your position in the place where you are, either through communication or through outreach or through sharing resources. If you have the funding, if you know people who are doing radical work, make sure to get them involved, either through trainings, either through platforms. Invite them to give speeches, invite them to get some of the funding. Try and get invested from your own research in their own work. If you're not part of the institution, if you're outside doing grassroots work, try and connect with more of us guerrilla workers inside the institution. Because I've seen so many hardworking people doing a lot of work that come to a point where there's no longer any funding. They're doing 5 jobs and they're doing this on the side because they cannot sustain their work. And unless we start getting the money outside of our fortresses, there's no way for us to continue working. And we are willing to collaborate together. We need more of us working on the inside, and we need more of us supporting and being willing to open this conversation with the outside. I'm not going to lecture anyone who's doing radical work on how was it that they're going to be reclaiming their history. You know what to do, and you're not going to listen to me. You've been doing it for so long. We just need to make sure that what you're doing can sustain itself, at least up until we can take back this history that's ours.
Thank you, Miriam. I made an announcement in the chat. I invited this moment people from the audience to post questions for you. And actually, Michelle Kowalinsky has a question for you, Miriam. So, Michelle, please go ahead.
Okay, Miriam, thank you so much. Well, I work with public history and arts, and here in Brazil, I have studied and worked with families of artists such as Hermann Schiffelbein and Panseri. In these projects, publics often share memories and testimonies, but they do not always take a part in decisions such as editing audiovisual materials. How can you think about the limits between participation, collaboration, and curatorial responsibility? And think about your publication with Thomas last year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. And it's a very practical question because it happens a lot that for any practitioner who's doing public history or participatory work, you need to define the rules and you need to share the authority, but also keep in mind that every tension needs to be modeled in a certain way and you need to find ways to get across and finish the project and do the work. And it's a difficult conversation to have if you're coming from a standpoint where you think that you have the knowledge. Because shared authority is not like again, it's not a buzzword. And when you're talking about histories that have been silenced and that belong to the community, it means it's theirs to share, to keep, to use, to exhibit, to reclaim, I don't know, to ask for reparations, to have lawsuits, you name it. And I think I'll give a concrete example. I'm working on a project now that's Jimena mentioned at the beginning in the introduction. I'm working at the Migrant Futures Institute to put together a platform that documents the lives of the people who were lost in the Mediterranean Sea in the last 10 years with the help of community members, families, survivors, and witnesses. We're constructing the project as a decentralized archive, and we're working with community groups in different parts of the Mediterranean. What we're doing is we're moderating the content that's going to be online, but the archive itself will stay with the community. And they're going to be the ones who decide if they want to do an exhibit, if they want to pursue a lawsuit against Frontex and EU, if they want to shut down the whole project and just distribute the archive, or if they want to do whatever it is that they want to do with it. It's their archive, it's for them to use. Our only dimension is a mediation dimension because the topic is one that is sensitive and it deals with violence. If it was a project like the one you mentioned, Michelle, in our publication last year, which was on the migration history of Portuguese and Cape Verdean grandmothers to Luxembourg, it was a less problematic topic because it didn't have the dimension of the violence that this project has. And we did control a lot of the process. We gave some access to the grandmothers to tell the story, but we didn't involve them in every step. And I think it's for every public history practitioner, it's going to be a conversation that you're going to have to have at a very early stage and decide, what am I winning if I go this way? What am I losing if I keep control this way? And it's also going to depend on how critical the project is and what kind of violence are we dealing with. Because I think the guerrilla public history approach is mostly valid when dealing with histories like stolen because of violence. So the violence element is what makes us use this methodology.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Miriam. We have another question from Yihed. Yihed, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, for the presentation and for, this input, Miriam. Also somehow you answered the question that I want to ask, because also I'm involved in search and rescue project, like basically both active in the Central Med, basically between Tunisia, Libya, and Italy. And I work with survivors, but also with family of missing people. And for me, it was also as a search and rescue activist, and in this white bubble, I was always asking myself this question: how document like the border violence without speaking over survivors and families? For me, they are the person who carry the real memory, and I mean who tell the story about what's happening now, at least in the Central Med borders. So somehow it fit to your new idea platform. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jihad. And I'm really looking forward for us to working together on this project. Although you weren't part of the first workshop we had because you were busy, but we're still gonna make this happen. Just to add on what I said, and in the context that you brought up, we have different levels of participation. We have different levels of testifying. We have different levels of witnessing. And I've divided this in circles in proximity to the person who's disappeared. So the first circle is going to be family members. The circle that's a bit looser or bigger than that is going to be the witnesses. And the circle after that is going to be the survivors. There's always a part for us because you asked the question, what is it that I can say about this? And do I have the right to speak about this? You do. Because what you're bringing into the story is very different from what the sister of a disappeared is bringing into the story. There are different levels of rehumanizing an experience and resurfacing the disappeared. One of them is going to be the personal life of these people that you don't know about, but the family members know about. Another is going to be the hardship of having to go through the process of leaving one place to another. And this is where we're going to be interviewing the survivors who were in the same space with the disappeared, and the search and rescue teams who have come across these people, who have seen them in different circumstances, who will bring some knowledge to us about what happened. And then there's the other level, which is the witnesses, when we're talking about the forensic scientists who deal with the bodies recovered after the disappearances. And these dimensions are also needed. We talk about different levels of witnessing, but we also have to differentiate about the objective of each of these. Some of them are going to be to rehumanize an experience and a life that existed before and beyond this disappearance. Some of them are going to be useful for us to try and track where this person was lost and whether or not we can link the information that was found before the disappearance and after. We talk about ante-mortem and post-mortem information, and that we need to link them. Some other testimonies will literally serve in the court when we're going to put files against human rights violations and crimes against humanities for the people who disappeared and were subjected to this border regimes and violences. Your testimony is going to be useful. The Coast Guard's testimony is going to be maybe useful. A witness testimony is going to be useful. So different levels of engagement with the witnessing and testifying, different levels of rehumanization, and different objectives.
Thank you, Miriam and Jihad. If there's another question from the public, this is the time to do it. Meanwhile, I have two more questions. Miriam, what's next for you? What are your next projects, not only professionally, but like in your career as a public historian?
Yes. So I'm gonna start with a joke that's not actually a joke. I keep talking to friends, and I said this yesterday to a friend, because he was telling me, "Oh, you need to do this book. It's gonna be very important." And in my head, I'm like, I'm so tired. I just want to be a housewife, do peanut butter ice cream, and sell it in the street. Khalas, I'm done. So what are my next projects? Have an ice cream truck. No, but in in more serious subjects. I'm working at the Migrant Futures Institute on this project called the Virtual House of the Rejected. And this is going to be my bread and butter for the coming 2 years, but hopefully also for another 5 years until we finish the work, we make it sustainable. We have the digitization hubs with the different communities, and we're working and hopefully getting Frontex to court. I'm very aware that what we're doing is gonna is going to give me less and less opportunities to be part of academia. It's already very hard to be part of academia. And this is why I keep moving every 2 years, every time the position ends, and they're like, no more funding, bye. And it's becoming very, very hard to stay in the humanities because of the job cuts and all the everything that's happening with the funding. And for someone who doesn't have a foreign passport or like a global north passport, let's say, it's almost impossible to be part of the system, to come to a point where you feel you're secure in a position that's permanent. I'm aware of all of this. So any plan that I'm putting on the table now and that I'm discussing with you, Jimena, might not happen, and I might literally be doing ice cream soon. But before this happens, before this happens, there's work that we are doing at the Migrant Futures Institute at Goldsmith, the University of London. The institute just launched this year, so we're starting to do the work. And it's an institute that's by migrants for migrants. So it wants to center the voice of migrants and for us to have more agency in deciding what is it that we want to do and what kind of research we want to do and how we want to carry it. And I have hope in my colleagues, and I have so much respect for everybody who's working within this institution. There's work that I want to continue doing to bridge multiple disciplines together, because this is also not what academia is doing. It keeps putting us in boxes where you're like, you're an anthropologist, you're an artist, you're a historian, and nobody speaks to one another, and all of us are working on the same subjects. I want to do more work that's anti-disciplinary, where we bring practitioners from different practices who are doing a million things, but who are trying to solve a problem, because there is no way for us to solve anything if we're not all involved in our capacities and with our skills. There's a lot of work that I still want to do with putting or creating spaces for academics of color to speak about their experience. And I've started a very tiny initiative with a friend of mine, Pascal Ghazali, who's an illustration artist. It's called Diaries of an Academic of Color, and it started getting published in Untold Mag. I'll find the link and I'll put it here. If anyone wants to contribute, please feel free to do so. We want to make it into a publication. We want to continue doing this work where we're speaking about our own experience and not from a third perspective voice, from our own voices. There's a network of Arab women in the humanities that I started a couple of months ago, and it's still growing. It's a space that I wanted to have because since the start of the genocide in Gaza and the war in Lebanon and in Palestine, it's been very difficult to have someone have your back, to have a conversation with someone who's going through similar things, where you could just find someone or a shoulder to cry on, but you could also find someone who's going to give you advice on how to face the backlash, how to face it when your publication is retracted, how to face it when your event is canceled, how to face it when your friend or a colleague has been silenced. What is it that you can do, etc. And I want to keep doing all this work. And I want to keep doing all this work collectively. And I'm going to keep advocating for collective work within academia, although, again, the academic system doesn't reward solidarity. It rewards individualism, but it's not working for us. It needs to adapt itself to us. Otherwise, I scream.
Maybe I'm sure the ice cream would be delicious, but I think your voice is too important to not keep trying at least a little more. I know how academia can be. It's cutthroating. It's full of people who are favorites and non-favorites. It's full. I mean, I know all that. I am part of that. Also, as a woman here in New York, a Latin American woman, and I know it, but not yet. Don't give up on academia just yet. And I will also invite you to think about the explorers for the launching of 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 your book. Um, oh, there's a comment here in the chat. I'm going to read it to you. It's from Alden Purdue, the president of the International Federation for Public History. Thank you so much, Miriam. Such important yet challenging work also involves much emotional labor. I wonder if you had advice for people engaged in such work, for students interested in getting involved, in terms of how to protect ourselves emotionally and prevent burnout.
Yes, thank you so much, Alwyn. Honestly, it's a work in progress, and I didn't want to say this at the beginning, but I keep getting sick every couple of months. It's like I crash, and it's sick physically, but it's not physically. It's because of how hard it's been to do all this work when you're witnessing all of this. And I don't have an answer for this. And I don't think any of the psychologists that are currently practicing are aware of how to accompany a community that is witnessing genocide. I really don't think so. But I know that from the practices that we are trying to mirror, we're trying to create, as I said, networks of solidarity where people can come together just to be together. You don't have to explain anything. You just sit in space where other people are experiencing the same thing. We're trying to do these, as I said, the diaries of academics of color to try and put into writing and creative practice what is it that we're experiencing. So you have a network of solidarity where you come in private spaces and just be there for one another. You have the spaces where you're being allowed to speak about your experience and put it into creative practice. You have the follow up that some institutions are already putting in place for practitioners to take care of their own mental health when they're working in situations like these. And we've done this when I was working with Thomas at the University of Luxembourg, when we were working with Syrian refugees and asylum seekers. We were also doing our own exit meetings with the psychologists at the university, because after every interview, you're offering support through the International Red Cross for the refugees, but you also need to be aware that all of this is also having an impact on you. So you need to follow up with your own institutional ways of dealing with all of this. But I really don't have a definite, like a cleared methodology that this is going to work. I'm doing all of this, like I'm doing the journaling, and I'm doing the conversations in the networks with my colleagues and friends, and I'm doing the follow up with the psychologist, and it's still glitching. And I'm just gonna put it in a metaphor because people are gonna understand when I think about this. It's like your laptop is overloaded with a bazillion things. And then every couple of weeks it crashes. It literally crashes. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to delete a few things. And you delete the most random shit because you're like, oh, the rest is very important. I cannot give up on it. I need it. So you delete 2 pictures and then you leave a bazillion other things. The drive is still full and it's still heating. Like the laptop, when you plug it, it's heating. It's functioning, but it's heating. And this is why it's going to crash every couple of months. If we want this to not be something that we're grappling with, the genocide needs to stop. There's only so much that we can do. The genocide needs to stop.
Thank you, Miriam. There's another question from Thomas. I'm sorry, I skipped it. I didn't see it before, but here it is. Thank you so much to both of you. Okay, this is so useful and very much needed. As you know, well-funding agencies often have political agenda. In your experience, how do you convince funders to invest in a term guerrilla that's very much challenging their own identity? Do you embrace the term guerrilla and find ways to show them that there will be a benefit, or should we downplay the term and make it happen in practice?
Thank you, Thomas, for the question. And I know where this question comes from. It's because we've been having arguments for the past 3 years, Thomas and I, on whether or not we need to conceal to make things happen, or do we need to be confrontational all the time. I'm always up for confrontation. Sometimes he wants to have these conversations and be diplomatic. It's fine. It's good because we play tag team, so we're co-piloting some of the things. When I become too confrontational and people are angry with me, he takes up the conversation and it happens. I think in the context of guerrilla, there's, and I'm not being very optimistic and just stating the fact. We've published the article, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago or less. I've been contacted by so many people who want to do so much work together and who want to collaborate. Not funders, of course, but people who want to carry out the work. And because if we want to mirror the guerrilla practices, we need to be humble in how much we can do with very little. So I don't want to go big and get 5 million euros to fund the guerrilla project. It goes against everything that I believe in and that I'm preaching for. I'm fine with starting small, in small circles, working with people who are fighters like us and who are willing to offer the space for us to talk about this. It's going to grow. I really feel like conversations like these with Jimena today are spaces where we could keep growing the networks, but also keep pushing our agendas forward. Fungus funding, yes.
Thank you so much. Miriam, there's still time if somebody else has a question. I had another question, Miriam, but you already answered it. I was going to ask you to talk about more the virtual house of the rejected. I don't know if you want to add something about that because the name of the project it's very appealing.
Yes, so maybe I'll say a few words. The project aims to rehumanize the lives lost in the Mediterranean. We want to counter every datafication, every document that's tried to put into numbers the lives that were forcibly disappeared in the last 10 years. And we want to do this through artistic research, digital history, and public history. This is a project that connects academics, practitioners, community members, or as I call them, community leaders in charge of the community groups, and other humanitarian organizations that have been trying to document the information, but the information is scattered everywhere. So we want to centralize the information, rehumanize the whole conversation around the disappeared. And I'll give an example because I always like to give visuals. It makes people understand things better. For instance, if I wanted to, and it's creating this virtual house because people were denied permission to have a home. This is why we're creating the space, because Europe didn't want these people to have homes. So we're creating a virtual home. If I wanted to document, for instance, the life of a person who was disappeared in the Mediterranean 7 years ago, what we could do on this platform is create a 3D object that connects both their history, the testimony of the people, the objects that they kept, to the actual portrait of the person. It could be, for instance, I don't know, it could be a piece of cloth or carpet in which you're going to see scanned images from when they were kids to when they grew up. And this carpet is going to move with the music because they like to sing to certain tunes. So when you go look for this person, you're going to see this representation on the platform that moves when you move, that has music because it represents them and this is who they were, that has images of them, and an object that represents home to them, their family members, and their friends. A platform like this is going to require solid creativity and artistic capabilities, but also a lot of safety and security measures for every community member who's contributing with their testimonies. And this is why we're aware that there's going to be a public facing dimension of the platform where you see these objects, and a private part of the platform where people can keep the testimony and use it if they wish to on their own in their own communities for whichever reason that they want.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I want to thank you. I think there's no more questions. I want to thank you. This was really awesome. It's really inspiring, and congratulations. I think you're doing amazing, amazing work, and I hope to see the publications out soon.
Did I
I, oh,
actually ask a question? I was
Clarissa, please go ahead.
sorry. I realized I could just unmute instead of trying to figure out how to type it. So first of all, thank you for the candor, the inspiration, the perseverance, and being so candid about the personal toll, but also the global stakes of your work and of the work of the communities that are treated and must become guerrilla. One of the tensions we always face as public historians when we contemplate archive seems to me magnified in your circumstance. So we have the tension between long-term preservation and access, which especially with the digital is more fugitive, more expensive, and maybe even more less green, less sustainable increasingly. And that of the what I want to say, the coming together. And while the coming together in community as community is transient in the sense of who's there, it obviously is not transient in terms of how that transient set of people carries it forward, disseminates, etc. So how do you think about those tensions between long-term preservation, which is necessary to ensure against erasure a second time, and kind of the transience of working on a guerrilla budget, etc.? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the answer is twofold. So there's the concrete aspect of when we're talking about the history that's been taken away through violence, it needs to come back to its people. And this is non-negotiable. We can't say that we need to keep it in the institution for it to preserve it longer and to make sure that it's accessible and etc., etc. But this doesn't mean that we're bringing it back to the community. And we cannot keep it away from the community. And this is why guerrilla needs to happen. We might have different ways of approaching how do we bring it back to the community, but it needs to come back. There's the second aspect, which addresses your question on preservation and funding. We do need a lot of resources to preserve an archive that has been based in an international institution for 100 years. Yes, but guerrilla movements operate on smaller scale projects, less funding. We can sustain our work in our archives in smaller initiatives. This means that it's not going to be one community taking back 6 million archival materials. It's going to be different communities taking at different parts of the archive, engaging with one another, reactivating these archives, finding new ways of preserving them that is not institutional or put by the institution. We might have our very different understandings of what it means to follow best practices. But this also means that we are entrusting the community, who's always had this history, to have its own way of implementing the knowledge that they were not allowed to put on display. It might look very different than what we have at the moment, but I don't think we can keep sustaining this model either. Like the institution model cannot be sustained any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarissa. And Miriam, we have a comment from Rachel Carnes. I'm going to read it. It has been such a presentation. Okay, I think I might be a guerrilla consultant. I work in repatriation of indigenous ancestors and their belongings with and on behalf of tribal nations, descendant communities in what is now known as Oregon and Washington. The issues you raised today are deeply resonant. I'll be thinking about what you've shared and will reach out. Maybe I'll fund my work by selling ice cream from a truck too.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. Thank you so much.
I think your work has been really inspiring, as I mentioned before, Miriam, and I'm really happy that you accepted the Explorer's invitation. As mentioned, also, I hope it's not the last time. And good luck with anything. And to the people who are here, also, thank you. Be tuned, stay tuned for our next Explorers, and thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you.